Welcome back to Mark's Demolition Diaries. Today we're here in Sutton Park, which is in Sutton Coldfield, Birmingham, very close to where I live and have done all of my life. And the topic that we're talking about in this episode is environmental. The impacts that we have on the environment as a demolition contractor, how that's evolved, what I witnessed from when I first got into the industry to where we are now, and some thinking around what the industry is going to look like in the future. We had a site at Station Road in Stetchford, and at that site there we used our crushing plant, and we used to take material, crush it, sell it. We also had a skip transfer business, and that skip transfer business was bringing skip material in, sorting it as best we could, removing the hardcore to go to the crusher, but then what was left, there were no alternatives to recycle, so that material would then be transferred to the local tip. And I remember going into the tips with a 6-yard skip on the back, and that would be tipped up into the landfill. And if you compare that to what happens now, we have modern buildings, components are composite, more difficult to recycle, and the demolition industry has had to evolve as the materials have changed that have been used within the construction of buildings. The introduction of the landfill tax made it more expensive to tip hazardous materials. This allowed people to then price in innovation into development of better, more relevant recycling equipment that could deal with these new materials that we were expected to process. That then led us to purchase a quarry, which was Meriden quarry, and we used this 27-acre site to bring material in and to process it further, sort and segregate. We were screening it for sand, gravel, removing the hardcore, and then we found that we were having many different types of materials, and that was hugely successful for us over many, many years. In addition to that, then we bought the site at Shady Lane, which we then designed and developed into our current headquarters, but also we designed and developed the first urban quarry in the UK. This was subject to grant support from the Waste Resource Action Programme, which was a government-based fund to help contractors innovate and develop recycling and better engineering processing of materials. So we used to take inert and contaminated material into that site, and we would sort, sieve, wash, segregate, process the material, remove the contamination, and from that we ended up with a variety of grades of material, from clay to gravels, and again that proved to be very successful. Saw a report recently where we've got something like, over the next 10 years, a 4 billion tonne shortage of aggregates in the industry. So we've got to get more out of what we do, and we've got to keep what we've got, ensure that it's not being shipped out, and all of these things are obviously on a whole bigger scale than what Colemans can deliver, but we do see that that will be the future. But the environment isn't just about the recycling and the use of the materials. From my work that I do with the European Demolition Association and various trips that I've been on around the world researching and developing these trends, I've seen that the environment is now front and centre of everything that we're doing, not just as a demolition company, not just as a construction company, but all of us as individuals all around the world globally. So we've started seeing trends in electric vehicles. In terms of our vans and our cars, we are now sort of running at 50% of our fleet, which is either hybrid or electric, and any time a vehicle comes to being replaced, it's always with a greener, cleaner set of credentials in terms of its performance. But there are also other ways that we can help reduce the amount of fuel that we burn. Simple stuff like just turning the engine off during breaks, making sure that the engines are serviced, that it's the most modern equipment that you can buy or hire, but also then looking at the fuel sources that you're using. So at the moment there's a trend in terms of using HVO oil, which is hydrogenated vegetable oil, and basically a lot of the new engines, the new machinery, is already able to receive this type of fuel source.
So just behind us here we have our HVO storage tank. So all our plant on the project is running on HVO fuel. Not only does it offer safety performance, but it's also more sustainable and environmentally friendly. So we anticipate that across the course of this project, we will use somewhere in the region of about 600,000 litres of HVO fuel. And if you compare that to diesel, that is potentially a carbon saving of about 1,600 tonnes. So you can see the mass benefit in terms of the fuel.
And what percentage would that be? Because I hear numbers something of like a 80 to 90% reduction in carbon.
Yeah, the figures basically back that up to be about 90% reduction in carbon.
So it's a significant
diesel.
impact that switching the use of the fuel or the type of fuel is having on our footprint.
Of course, yeah. So like many businesses, we've noticed that the use of HVO has dramatically decreased our carbon emissions.
So all of our machinery that we have at Colemans, whether hired in or we run ourselves, we run 100% either on electric in terms of the Brock fleet and the cutting equipment, tower cranes and the likes, or we use the HVO oil, which has a significant reduction in terms of carbon emissions.
We're responsible for 30 to 40% of all global emissions, of which, and this is really important to take note of, 30% of that comes from steel and concrete, cement. We're heavy in the use of oil, and 1/3 of all waste comes from construction. And I believe, and we're also, well, we're seeing it already, that the carbon reduction strategy is having an impact on the type of work that we do, where we're working, how it's done, the equipment we use and the fuel sources. So I anticipate that while things are changing quickly now, they're going to continue to do so, even at a more rapid pace into the future. Fossil fuel companies are coming to the table and they're working on e-fuels and synthetic fuels, which I think will also be part of the mix going forward.
The larger the engine, the more difficult it is to power from electricity. So in the future, we see that hydrogen will be the fuel source that will work best for heavy plant and equipment. We see that JCB are working with hydrogen. We know that Skanska are working with hydrogen, and that's what we believe the future is. Clearly, everybody wants to move to a safer, better planet, but is a client spending millions, millions and millions of pounds going to be spending 30 or 40% over the odds to have a cleaner type of demolition? So government support is clearly very important, and we think that that will be something that certainly from our research and particularly coming out of Europe, the work that we do with the EDA, we've seen that these are policies that are currently in the making. At the moment, most of the material that's processed from steel and scrap copper and the likes gets exported to China. But actually, when you think about it, it's causing a huge amount of damage to the environment, shipping this material to docks, loading it. Whereas, you know, if you rewind many years ago, British Steel and the likes, we used to process all of this material here. And I would see that in the future, these resources are going to become ever more finite. So we're over on another part of our site here, down at Langley, and one of our initiatives is what we're calling green steel. And this is effectively to cut the carbon footprint for the traditional method of recycling steel, which is 1.85 tonnes of carbon emitted into the environment to produce 1 tonne of steel. What we're doing here is saving the steel. It is then being provided to a partnered steel fabrication company, and we adopt a materials passport procedure, and we basically re-engineer and repurpose the steel that you see down beside us.
The process started at pre-contract stage, where we spent an extensive amount of time investigating the age of each of the buildings on site. We then determined which buildings were suitable for potential recycling and reuse and which weren't, and we used our new scanning equipment in each of the buildings that were identified as suitable to create effectively a 3D model of the skeleton of each structure. We were then able to itemise and itinerize the steel for reuse in the future.
We're working with partners, sharing our knowledge and wanting to collaborate and almost incubate these ideas and develop them for the future. And really the only way for us to do that is to share that knowledge, be more open, be more collaborative, but we do see that that's the future of what we all collectively need to do for a better environment for us all. Hopefully I'm giving people an idea of the changes that I've experienced over the years, how the industry has evolved. We see that automation of these processes, digital demolition as we call it, is actually key to what we do, making sure we stay ahead of the game, making sure we share that knowledge, and that we continue to be leaders in the field of what we do.